My guest today is Greg Walter. He is an author and experiencer. His book is called Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds. It's a great title. We had an excellent conversation on the phone a few weeks back, so I've been looking forward to this. Greg, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you all. I hope this to be an entertaining and informative presentation.
Yes, right before I did the intro there, we were talking and you mentioned the Cherokee, and then I noticed were you looking for a book there?
Yeah, there's a book here that I have. I ordered. I think you can get it online. It's called The Cherokee Little People Are Real. And there's a couple other little inset things I put in the book. I tend to do that when I find an interesting topic, and it just elaborated on that part of the world. Um, a dear friend of mine, I'll pull the book and hold it up. This is um, this is from my friend John Roth, and he wrote a book titled American Elves. And this is a bibliography of the little people from 380 ethnic groups throughout the Western Hemisphere. And he touches on the Cherokee, the East Coast, all the tribes and their lore. And basically, what he did was he took the time to go through each tribe and digging into their lore, their creation stories and stuff like this, and then pulling up everything that he could find about the little people.
Hmm.
That's why half of this book is it's all bibliographic reference. And so it's a good start point for your audience, as far as if they're going to do research on this stuff. I mean, giants are kind of included in this, and so this is where we get into the whole concept of our favorite hairy cryptid,
Yeah.
um, that biped that he is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because throughout the world, not all places, not all tribal relations and so forth have their giants, but they all seem to have their version of the little people or the immortals. And they come in many different shapes, sizes, names. And so this is where, to your audience again, that if you're really interested in this stuff, dive in and try to learn the lingua franca of your local tribe, and be able to speak at least some words in that, or sing some songs in it.
Hmm.
Because that's really going to open your world. I mean, these are the people that have been on the ground for the last 10 to 20,000 years, depending on, who and where. And so, it really, to just base yourself and immerse yourself in their knowledge.
So, in your email, just a couple things here that I want to touch
Sure.
on.
Sure.
I did look for that book. I f-
Right.
I found it. I found it that some site said it was out of print, and then another site said it was like $80. So I'm still kind of looking for it. But
Okay.
also in that email, you mentioned to me a tribal elder named Charlie Thom.
Yeah, Tom.
Tom, okay. So I went and I actually found a small little YouTube video of him singing the Bigfoot song. And it's wild. I've never seen anything like that. It kind of made the hair on my arm stand up a little bit. And you could tell it kind of had an effect. There were a couple people sitting around him in a circle, and you could kind of tell that it had an effect on them as well. And when he finished singing, he said something along the lines of, and it works. Like if you sing this song, they'll come. And I thought it was funny in the background there was a lady sitting next to him. As soon as he starts singing, the lady's looking over. She changes her posture and fixes her direction right on the woods. And it's
Aha.
just it's just an incredible little moment that somebody captured on film. And then of course the song itself is just, oh, and he said this as well. He said, uh, this is a song that's been sung many years before I was born. So there's like this, you could tell there's like a,
Many generations.
yes, like there's an oratory tradition there that he's just kind of upholding. So thank you for sending me that. I'll say this too. The idea I think here is that
Yeah, you're welcome.
certain songs will bring out certain spirits or cryptids or creatures.
Yes, yes. And that's long standing. And so that, and the thing is that thank you also for respecting my wishes with, because one of the things I've tried to be just very mindful of is not revealing place and not revealing tribal names.
Okay.
Because really it's not necessary, and it's something that I mean, I can give your audience some clues on how to kind of locate a place where, and if you do all the right steps, just like they have done for arguably thousands of years, you can actually get to a place where these things come to you. You don't go to them. And then from there, once they're in the general area, then you sing that song, and that's what brings them in, and that's how you gain knowledge. And different tribes would handle that differently. I know that, like, I feel safe in saying this, but like the Sioux, and in certain tribes there of the Greater Rockies, they had a thing where it's like if they could draw the thing in, that if they could touch finger to finger, that they would be and that they would get the power of what was called the Watatash, which was going back to the time when man and animals spoke. So, and we do this sometimes with both wild animals and also with our own domestic animals, where we talk to them. They talk to us, and they tell us what they need or what they want, or, and it could go even deeper. It just depends on your connection with that animal. And so it's really it's an amazing gift.
Yes, yes. And I just I just wanted to hit record there when we first started talking today because you were already touching on stuff that is very relevant to me. You asked me where I live and I told you and you said, "Well, that's you brought up the Cherokee because
Yes.
they were very much established very near to here." And I just found this book that I'm reading right now. It's called Myths of the Cherokee. And I was so it's providential that you brought that up for one thing, but also last night you mentioned giants a second ago. And last night I was reading in this book and there's a Cherokee legend and written legend because I'm coming to find that they actually kept records.
Oh
They were
yeah.
civilized enough to keep records, and in their records, they have um, an account of that comes from the Delaware peoples, and the Delaware tribe had a tribe that they eventually wiped out that they were warring with. They were called the Allegheny, and I think
Yes.
they called it the Allegheny or
Aha.
something like that. But they were giants. They were rumored to be giants. And what's crazy is this guy who's writing this book, who's taking these accounts, he was very closely associated with the Smithsonian. And he's just straight up telling you in this book that, yes, these were giant peoples. They built forts up near the Ohio and the Allegheny River, which I think would probably be modern day Pittsburgh in that area. But
Aha.
it's just so
Right.
fascinating. And the Cherokee knew about this, so they kept a record of it. And of
Wow.
course,
Wow.
there's all this other great lore. I'll just cap it off with that today because I don't want to. I want to get to you and your story and your research and all that. But I just had to share that with you because we were talking about the Cherokee.
No, that's super good. Yeah, when I read, I mean, years and years ago, and I reconnected with this little verb. It's a little quote from the book Ishi. And he was the one that was the last surviving member of his tribe, taken under the hands of the Krobers, who he lived literally at the Department of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. So here's a guy, rather than scrounging up Indian arrowheads and stuff like that, this guy's making them, you know. And so it was kind of fun because it was this very close connection with how these people lived. prior to the Euro-American settlement. But there was a quote in the very beginning of the book that just blew my mind. And it just reads, many moons after, those living in distant worlds could read and know how the people spoke and who were their gods and heroes and what was their way. And to me,
Mm,
that just opened it up.
yeah.
You know, I mean, it went beyond our normal Christian belief systems, and and that basically, I think what I came to the foregone conclusion of was that basically, I think as a hominid, that we're inherently spiritual people. And you pick whatever religion, organized or not, but to think that these folks that were outside of Christendom had no religion when they really did,
Yeah.
and they had their spiritual ways. And it's like running into one of their gods, you know.
Yes. Here's one that if anybody, I think it's a book you can
Oh
still
yeah, yeah,
get.
yeah, yeah.
Blackout Speaks. And this is just uh a, an exegesis on how spiritual these people really were. When you read through this, you realize how different modern man's mentality is from these people. It is light years away, and not, and
Right,
we're not, and I don't think we're light years away in a good way. I think our consciousness has evolved to a very desperate moment right now.
right.
But I think that these people had something golden, something pure. And
Yeah, yeah.
some of their religions too. I've read about tribes, and I need to brush up on this, but I read about tribes in the Southwest who had legends of a Christ who
Hmm.
who was born in a faraway land and killed by a faraway government on a
Hmm.
cross.
Hmm.
And they said that the star people came to them and told them about this Christ and updated them on his life
Oh
around
wow.
2000 years ago, like right around the time,
Right, right,
So
right.
they were, they were, I don't know, they were very spiritual.
Well, and to think that, I mean, it's amazing because because I have a friend that studied many, many religions over in Ashland, and Ashland, Oregon's kind of this mecca of this sort of stuff. But that's what he was telling me was that the little people, the angelic figures, and how, Christendom had this, in kind of part of their whole belief system. And so, I don't think it's that big of a stretch to think that, tribes that live on some far Pacific island or somewhere in the far North Arctic, are sort of worshiping and reveling in it's the same kind of thread, albeit different. And so, this is just an iteration of that. And so, and this is where, I just took this way beyond a Bigfoot sighting, that it's like Bigfoot ran across the road, jumped over a log, and wow, that was cool. Well, that something close to tells us nothing,
Mhm.
other than they saw something weird, and so and this is, yeah, but my personal story, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just say this and we can launch into that. I think that the title of your book very much speaks to what we're saying here. The title of your book to me sort of points to there being a neighboring dimension that will from time to time interact with us. And I know that you also touch on Bigfoot within that as well. So what got you there to write the book, and what got you into this stuff?
So it was basically a reflection of an occurrence that I had experienced. This was about 24 years prior to me beginning to write the book. And this happened at a time in my life. I was in top physical shape. I was working up in Alaska on factory trawlers, and I was down here for a period. I went out. I was doing a pack trip basically, and it was like a 60-mile, 8-day trip. I knew that it was going to be a rugged trip because the trail was it wasn't maintained. And so, and it was probably almost like an Indian trail, so to speak, but it was in a wilderness in California, and I went out to this area, and and so I went to this one place. I burned some sage and kind of prayed, I guess. I don't know. It's funny because there's kind of in the lore here, they call it to cry for luck, and you go out there and you do this. And so nothing happened there, just a beautiful night, and I should say it was on a waxing moon, and it was the first of the month where it was a blue moon too. And so may as well throw that into the mix. Um, and and so at any rate, the next night I went out to this other place, and I just stumbled into this area because I was following this trail. Well, I was hoping to anyways. And I find myself in this nice little meadow, big cedars, and there was and this was like a mid-elevation ridge line, so it wasn't anything, it wasn't like some high mountain peaks and crystal lakes that everybody, not a popular place, a lot of brush and beating around through that. But so I find myself at this place, and there's a spring. And at the spring, I go over to get water, and I see this beautiful giant salamander. And I'm going, wow, you're so pretty, and it reminded me of my pet salamander when I was a kid. And I think the thing looked in my eye and could pick up on, okay, there was a connection. And so, it's like we're on the same page kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so anyway, I put him back down, thanked him for being there. And then the next day, I do this even further arduous hike out on this ridge line, find myself at a place where it's a divide between two major creek drainages. And so when I'm right below the divide, I'm in like a bench area, like an amphitheater, and probably about half the size of a football field, something about that size, maybe a little bit bigger. But there were some upper ponds there that had it had water, but it also had these Darlingtonia plants, and the Darlingtonias, they're actually a carnivorous plant. They eat bugs and everything, and but it showed me also because there were conifers nearby, so I was on a contact zone, and this is important for later. But anyway, so I'm at this place where there's two contact zones with geology going on, so there's different plant life. And I go up on the ridge line. I'm looking at these tarns, or these little, they were like snow melt kind of pools, up on the ridge line. And I'm looking out over the region. I mean, I really got just a grand view from up there. Come back down, go back to my camp. I decide, well, okay, I'm going to take a shower. It was a hot day, and like this. So I warm up a little water. I walk over to a flat rock. I look down, and that's when I saw the footprint. And I went, well, what the hell is a barefoot somebody out here, like this? But it was a big print. I mean, whoever this fellow was, I definitely want him on my football team. So anyways, um, and then I noticed around my camp, I saw like smeared mud. It looked like as though there was a scuffle with like a couple of bears or something, but I couldn't quite make it out, but still it looked like big footprints, but smeared, so kind of scattered. And not new, like as though it had been several days, since those prints were made. But at any rate, so then the sun's going down. It's right at that time of day, and this is something that Carlos Castaneda, Tales of Power, and all that fun stuff. Well, it's right at that. I think he called it, the time of power, when when basically the sun is descended, and it's right at that thin red line out on the western horizon. And I could see out to the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
And so I was kind of, I don't know, not overly far from there. But anyways, I I get out there, and then the moon hadn't risen yet, but I could see, like, on the treetops, you could see the moonlight, hitting the treetops up there. And then that's when this thing just appeared in the amphitheater. And it crash, crash, stomp, stomp, crump, blump, blump, bump, like this, goes over to the water, and to this tarn, and starts drinking. Well, in later time, I would recollect this and I would realize, wait a minute, this thing didn't come from the ridge line because there was water up there. And so it pauses. And I think now, just recently, I just had this epiphany the other night that I think this thing was waiting for me to sing the song,
Mm.
to actually introduce myself and say, hey, I'm here. And so he's drinking water. I hear a splash, splash, and then a dun, 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 crash, crash. And now I could see him, just at least his shape, because he was keeping to the shadow. Very smart. Whatever this thing was, it was being very, very coy and very smart about staying in the shadow and keeping an eye on me. And then finally I saw his eyes and I went, my God, and definitely a biped. There was no doubt about it. Yeah, and his eyes just, I mean, they just tore right into me. He could read every thought I was thinking. This thing was three steps ahead of me, and if you ever, for any of your audience, if you guys ever encounter one of these things, you'll realize the power in these things, so anyways, it continued, it turned, it basically just continued on this semicircle around my camp. Um, and then from there went down the hillside and went off into history. So obviously I'm freaked out. I didn't have a gun. I was holding a flashlight. It basically almost screamed at me, but didn't say anything, just telepathically saying, "Don't even think about it. Don't go putting that light on me." But like I say, it just continued. I stayed up for several hours, and then from there, finally exhaustion set in. Off I went to sleep because I realized, you know what, if this thing wanted to come back and club my brains out, I mean, I'm here. It's not like he's got to go searching for me. And the thing I saw was very athletic, thin, very muscular but thin. Could handle himself. I mean, this thing could chase down a deer at a dead run and kill it easy, easy.
Yes.
Yeah, and so something that could travel across the landscape, but he didn't come crashing in from the ridge line because I wasn't that far from it, and I would have heard him, and saw him, so he was like right there. And in the morning, I would go over, and I think I might have found the bed or the place where he emerged from, but there wasn't any sign of him, and I didn't think to go over and try to track him, to find more prints and stuff like that, and so at any rate, I went on to my trip and just had a grand, beautiful time. Ran into bear out there, even they were like two yearlings, hanging out in a meadow, and just really enjoyed visiting with them for over an hour. And I felt like I was a part of it, that I wasn't above it, I wasn't below it. I mean, Tom Brown talks about this in his tracker books and stuff like this, that, to be a part of it, where you're just out there with nature. And so that's kind of what this thing, I think, something must have rubbed off. But anyways, off I went on my time, and 20 20 years later, well, all right. So in the course of that, I did return there two times, mainly with some very close friends. And then one time I went out there by myself, and everything felt very sterile, very cold. Nothing, no footprints, no nothing. And the one time we ran into a group from New York. They were a small group of five people in camouflage, and the Society of Cryptozoological Research. hmm
Okay.
Yeah, and the weird thing about that was that fellow had gone out there two different, or I think one other time, and then he would go out there again with people trying to find Bigfoot and stuff like this. And
Wow.
and after that third trip, he came back and died 6 weeks later from an inoperable brain tumor. And you know what I think it is that's the power of the immortals. And when you muck around with this stuff, and especially in their sacred areas, you could cross a line. So a cautionary note there, and I wouldn't
Yes.
worry about the big guy. I'd worry about something that stands about 2 feet tall that, is basically much more powerful.
Yes. You know, the detail in your story. about the
Right.
salamander sparked something for me. When I was a kid, my childhood best friend had a creek near his house that we would play in.
Hmm.
And there were salamanders in that creek. Now they
Hmm.
were hard to find, but we would go down there, and if if we looked hard enough and if we turned over the right rock, we would be able to find one and just analyze
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
And it, as it turns out, I'm looking back at this later in life and I'm thinking where that friend lived was right on the edge of the Uwharrie National Forest, which is known to be a Sasquatch hotspot.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
I don't know. I wonder, and I know that there are these connections between the salamanders and the water babies as well. I don't know. I
Yes.
just the salamander just stuck out to me in your stories.
Yes. And so yeah, just to continue on that thread, um, so in years after, about I want to say 4 or 5 years after, I was looking into this, I was researching, I also talked to a couple of elders, and they told me a story about how from time to time the 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 medicine man, if you want to call him, or formulist, doctor, whatever, from time to time they have a need to go up on the ridge lines, and there's certain prayer spots they have to prepare. They fast, they eat certain foods, they sweat. There's several sweat lodges, and they do all that. Then they go up on the ridge lines, and they're in their prayer spots, and when they're going up, but they know they're on the right path. And this is what blew my mind. The fellow told me this, that you know they knew they're on the right path when they would see a salamander in a spring. And I hadn't mentioned anything about salamanders to this person, but then it came back to me. I went, my God, that's what happened to me. And then what it is when they see that salamander, then they know that next night they're going to have their encounter. And so they have to be prepared to sing the song and introduce themselves. And the goal in this is that they gain knowledge from this thing because it can portend the future. And what it does is for the tribe that there's not going to be any fish running that year. There's not going to be, the acorn harvest might have a blight on it. So you're going to lose 50% of your acorn crop. So what's your plan B? And this is where they learn to survive in an otherwise inhospitable place where from time to time they'd have a bounty of food, but then other times they would have a starvation.
Hmm.
And they'd have to send, the elders for a walk in the snow. And it was a horrible thing because the elder would literally get up from the cook fire and voluntarily go because they know that they have to feed the younger ones. And so, it became something that, I think the doctor, medicine man knew when to go on these journeys, to be able to go up there and gain this knowledge that would basically keep the tribe alive. And that was the importance.
Yeah. And thank you for telling your story, by the way. I think you laid it out very nicely. I was able to kind of see a lot of the details in my head as you were telling it, like with the sun going down and, the Pacific Ocean out in the distance, but also just the detail of the creature drinking the water because I know the sound of something drinking water. Even people, even urbanized people, you can sometimes hear your dog across the house or downstairs lapping up water.
Right.
It's a very distinct sound. And I'm just
Yeah.
wondering when you heard that and you looked over and you saw this big shadow, um, did you feel like it was looking at you, or did you actually see the eyes and an expression?
Well, yeah, so when he was drinking, it was just this misshapen shape. It was dark on dark kind of thing. So I couldn't
Yeah.
really make him out when he was doing that. But then when I heard the splashing and he started walking and he came out into a slightly lighter place where now I could see him and
Mhm.
his eyes were just intense. And it was that, and it was right then we connected,
Okay.
and it was just, it was a numbing moment. I mean, it really, it would, for anybody that's not used to, and I wasn't used to this, running into something like this. Even though in my psyche, I'm thinking, God, I wonder if I'm going to see Bigfoot, but I didn't do that very much. It's like I remember this thing about like sometimes with wealth, with vibrational escrow, that you put it out there and then you forget about it. You imagine you having wealth or whatever you want, love or whatever, and then you just let it go, and then that's when it comes to you. And so, and that I feel like that sort of what happened here. But yeah, you mentioned the water babies. There's land babies and water babies. And the water babies, and so within the lore, what it was that these immortals were basically at one point or another, and I can't remember the exact reason why, but they were relegated to these ridge lines, to these springs. And so they would be around these springs. And this is really key, to when you go up to these places and you see a spring, that revere it. I mean, thank it for being there, and because they'll hold power. And this is especially true with the tribes in the desert, where you go out to like an oasis, and especially like on a full moon night or something like that. Yeah, that's where you'll run into their immortals out in those places. And so yeah, it's interesting when you tie in the two, and then since then I've had some odd encounters with, like, my friends and I. We went for a hike in the general area there, and we were down along a river canyon. They were eating lunch and telling tall tales, and when I'm sitting there and I'm looking across the creek, I was sitting there for about 20 minutes. I look across, I see this frog, and the frog's sitting across the creek over there, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and we're going back. Well, so she, I think it was, jumps in the water, boom, gone. I thought, oh, well, there she goes. And then she pops up on my side of the creek, boop, comes up like 4 feet from my feet, and I'm going, wow, hi, and so we had this nice little moment. And my friend I was with lives out there, and just recently he had a 20-minute. It was kind of like an interlude with a bobcat, and the
Oh, wow.
bobcat just came up, sat down, and they were staring at each other, and he was licking his paws and doing whatever.
Which
But
that in itself is quite rare, I think,
yeah,
for a
yeah.
bobcat to have any kind of an interaction with you other than seeing you and running away.
Right, right. And that's, I think, what it is since he lives out there. I mean, here's a guy, this is a dear friend of mine. He lives out right within probably 6 air miles of where I had my encounter. And he's lived out there for
Wow.
45 years, and lives on a native village site,
Yeah.
with the pit house diggings and, like this. He seldom has visitors. He doesn't like anybody disturbing anything out there. On his land, actually, he has this, it's like a rectangle made from little rocks, in a meadow area. And what it is it's a geoglyph. A geoglyph, what that was for was, it was like an arena where they would play their stick games,
Really?
for the village. They would play a game, and they had that. And what it is that the rocks are all lined up. Well, the crows every once in a while fly in, flip the rocks around to get a little bug out from under the rock. And so every couple of years he goes out and realigns the rocks.
Oh, so he's on sacred ground, more than
Well,
likely.
yeah, yeah, but it was a village site, and
Sure.
the interesting thing though is that no sightings, no knocks on wood, no
Okay.
footprints, nothing, and so yeah, pointing to the fact that
Wow.
you got to go to them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I've
so
been
yeah.
very quiet about my personal encounters on here, um, just for a variety of reasons. But I do have some encounters, and I'll say this: one of the areas I lived in the North Carolina mountains, they were known to be around, and they wouldn't do knocks out there either, but they were very much there. And there, I've got stories all day for that. But I want to touch on something,
Mhm.
just going back to your story maybe one more time here. Something stuck out to me, and that was you said that you didn't hear this thing like coming down from a ridge line or crashing through the forest really like until it got right up on you. And I just had that thought like these things, whatever they are, have a tendency to be very graceful when they want to be. And I was in
Right.
Cherokee, actually. Speaking of Cherokee again, I was in Cherokee National Forest, uh, and I didn't have a tent. I was sleeping under the stars, and I made my little setup, and I got in my sleeping bag. And as soon as I got in the sleeping bag and just settled, I heard something that I didn't know was there, but it was right on me, walk right up to me and stand over me. And it had two big bipedal sounding, feet, because I just heard
Right.
I thought it was a person at first. And to the point where I almost said something, I caught myself, but the words were almost out of my mouth. I almost said, "I hear you," but I stopped from because I thought it was a person. And I
Right.
realized later that it wasn't a person, and I had a gun on me. So
Uh-huh.
I didn't turn around. I didn't do anything. I just laid where I was, and I just pulled my pistol up and had it on my chest like this.
Uh-huh.
And I fell asleep like that.
Right.
And
Right.
but whatever this thing was, it was right on me. I had no idea. And when it wanted to, it just gracefully walked right up and stood over me. And of course, I eventually
Right.
just passed out because I
Right.
didn't feel threatened. And I woke
Uh-huh.
up the next morning to the sound of some turkeys
Ah,
walking behind me. And
right.
and when I heard that, I woke up and I turned around and I looked towards the direction of the turkeys. And that's when I realized how steep the the mountain was that I was
Ah,
at the base of.
wow.
So
Uh-huh.
this thing not only snuck up on me, but it came down a mountain to do it. And it made no sound.
Wow.
Whatever that
Wow.
was, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
think whatever we're dealing with here has a graceful element to it.
oh God, yes. When they want to, like
Yeah.
they're so well attuned, and this is another thing too, is that sometimes attunement with your natural surroundings occurs when you can feel. I mean, because recently I went out to a kind of a nearby area just this past June on a full moon. And to me, the feeling was repulsement. It wanted me out of there. And
Mhm.
um and it's funny because I have friends that live down in the River Canyon, and I was saying, well, I'm thinking about going up, and they look at each other and they look back at me and they look at each other and they're like, no, Greg, you don't want to go there.
Mhm.
And oh really, why? Well, they're doing their ceremonies up there. Don't disturb. So I said, well, okay. But sometimes what it is when you get into a place, just like you were describing, where sometimes you feel you're in attunement with it, it's nice, the vibe is good, and other times it's like it's very tense, and it can feel like it does not want you there,
Yeah.
yeah, and so, and that's take that sign,
Yes. And a lot of
yeah,
times too, when you're in a region, if you have the opportunity, talk to the locals a little bit, because if you tell a local where you're going, more than likely they will tell you if you shouldn't be there. You will
right.
get some sort of a warning, more than likely, from the locals. They probably won't go into detail, but they will probably say, "Hey, stay away from such and such." And you know, an example of that for me was one of the places I lived. There was a creek nearby, and this is in the middle of the mountains, right? And the locals always said, "Stay away from that creek."
Right.
And so I did. There were a couple of times
Right.
I got close to that creek, and you would hear kids singing and playing, and there were no kids around. There were no
Right.
kids where this was. It was in such a ravine that it'd be tough to get in, tough to get kids in there. So for whatever reason, the locals told me stay away from that creek, and I'm sure it was for good reason. And I'll
Ye-
stop with my personal encounters at this point. I just wanted to
No, no,
throw
no,
that
no.
in.
That's really good. The thing I was looking up was that there was a before I went on my trip, when I was going, I ran into there was a fellow that had a guide service, and he was like the patriarch of the guide service. He was doing this since the 1950s or whatever. And And I told him, or he said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go hiking up, on these places." And and he grabs my arm. He says, "You be careful out there, boy. They're
Mhm.
out there, like this. And you just better watch out, And it scared the hell out of me, but it got me also exhilarated, where I thought, okay, this is going to be quite the adventure. But another fun story that I can relate to the audience as far as if this stuff's really time tested, like has this been going on for very long? And because there was the Bigfoot craze in like the mid 60s, and then from there, and there was a story it was in a Native American magazine called Many Smokes, and it was about the Modoc iteration of the Bigfoot, when they kind of did a story about it. But um, but in this case, the thing, but it's also a book. It's called The Dark Watchers,
Yeah,
and it's
Greg.
written by, I think it was the grandson. Yeah, I think it was the grandson. Yes. Off.
Uh, oh, we had a
Did we
little bit
get
of
cut
a
off?
yeah, we had a little bit of a lag there in the recording. Um, I think we're good right
Uh-huh.
now. Uh, I think maybe if you start with the
Okay.
Dark Watchers
Okay.
again, we'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I found this book. It was online. There wasn't many of them left. It was called The Dark Watchers,
Okay.
and it's written by it's the grandson of oh, he's a very famous author, Steinbeck.
Ah,
Um, and so this was Thomas Steinbeck, and what it was Steinbeck. The first name slips my mind. I'm losing it here. But anyways, his mother was a lady that basically was a school teacher in. So this is a story about the little people of Big Sur,
okay.
basically, that region. They were called the Dark Watchers. And what it was, she would ride into these valleys on a horse and teach the kids at a rancho and then ride back out again. Well, there was one pass she would go over, and she would leave like some little treats and some trinkets on a little rock that was in a little alcove, underneath some trees. And she would come back, and there'd be this beautiful array of acorns and feathers waiting for her. And so that was the connection with the Watchers. And the interesting thing with this story was that it dated back into Spanish California, where they even called them Los Vigilantes Oscuros, literally meaning the Dark Watchers. And this is where sometimes we tend to think of this stuff as a sort of a contemporary phenomena when really it dates back. It's just you got to look and really research to find, these evidentiary, tales of this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm gonna have to look more into the Dark Watchers.
yeah,
I know when we talked on the phone, I'm pretty sure I think Canada came up, and I think we just mentioned a couple things about regional lore from up there. And I'm a big fan of stories from that region. I
yeah.
just had a researcher on from Canada. He's in the Harrison Hot Springs area there. And,
Okay,
it's
that's
just
British Columbia.
yes, it's in British Columbia, and it's just another world up there, of course. But
Right.
this particular researcher, he'll sometimes go to a national park there that's literally called Sasquatch Provincial Park. Since there's so many sightings, they named the park after this
Yeah.
creature.
You know what's funny about that is, and so when we get into like this thing's a myth. I mean, this is BS. It's people on way too many hallucinogenic mushrooms, and there is power in the hallucinogens. I'll give you that. But there's an interesting story about a guy that is a criminologist, and what it is he catches criminals by their footprints. And so looking at their boot prints and stuff, he lives in Texas. He doesn't give a rip about Bigfoot. He doesn't believe in it nor not believe in it. He doesn't care. He focuses on what he does. He catches criminals by their footprints. So they threw about like 15 or 20 of these cast prints of the Sasquatch prints in front of him. And he looked at them and looked at them, and about a month later, he contacts the people back and says, "Hey, you can have all your casts back, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you of like 20 of them, there was all but two of them that were just hokum. Whoever did these were having a lot of fun and so forth like this. But two of them jumped out at him, and there's no way that he said unless you've got some trained podiatrists out there making these footprint casts, these things. I mean, this is the real deal. One of them was from Northern California. The other one was Harrison Hot Springs,
Okay.
and so I thought that was pretty remarkable.
Yes,
Um,
there are things in this country, in America, that are regarded as fables or regarded as stories that
right,
are actually more of a reality once you get to the Pacific Northwest in your area and up into BC. Things just become a little bit more real. I think, I've got a book here from David Paulides. I probably shouldn't show it, but it's called the Hoopa Project. I'll just throw it up real
oh
quick.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Yeah.
this he's got some sections in this book that go into local laws, local legislations that are Sasquatch oriented laws in place in some of these places.
Right.
Where local government has said, look, this is such a thing here. We've got so many people coming forward talking about seeing this thing that we've got to put some sort of laws in place in case someone shoots one,
Yeah,
essentially.
that was that was in Southern Washington,
Yeah.
and Skamania County, I think it was.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and and yeah, and that was, if you ever go visit the Ape Cave, that's on the south side of Mount St. Helens, and it was in that general region, in that whole area. There's a great movie. It's the one that just came out with the Avett brothers, The Dark Divide, and I have his book. Um, I think this is it right here. Yeah, it's called Where Bigfoot Walks. I think as the
Okay.
sun goes down, I'll turn the light on. Am I pretty dark?
Yeah, when the sun went down to the light from your window, yeah, of course went with it. But did you say that
Now I'm so busted. All right, here we go.
there you go.
Um,
Did you say
yeah,
that
so
the
so this is the book. It's called Where Bigfoot Walks,
okay.
and this is by Robert Michael Pyle, and I think the name of the movie though was The Dark Divide, and it's a cute story. He's a butterfly expert, and he runs around all over the hills. He loves botany and stuff like that, and he wrote a book. Well, he was our guest speaker out here in the Siskiyou Mountains, and his theme was of butterflies and Bigfoot, and
Hmm.
but one thing about that area there in the Gifford Pinchot is that they have a huge area of lava beds. And every once in a while they get people to get lost and eventually die out there because they're stumbling around in just a maze of the lava beds. And it's a big area is the problem. And so and there's also a lake there in that southern Gifford Pinchot. It's called Cultus Lake, and people want to go. You can go to the other side of the lake, and in the lava, you can look. It's like a foot or so underwater, but there's a footprint. It's cast in the lava of a Bigfoot.
Hmm.
That's what they think. I mean, it's anyone's guess, but yeah, they have that in the southern Washington in the GP.
Yeah.
In that area, it's popular.
Yeah, and with your sighting, it's like, you kind of hiked into this remote place and then you had this encounter, and then I look at the region, and then I think about, because I've been looking into a lot of Canadian lore lately just because I think some of
Yes.
the best stuff comes out of there. And I was
Yes.
reminded recently about the story about William Rowe, who actually signed an affidavit in Edmonton, Alberta, that he actually really observed. He went before the law and said under oath that he observed this thing in like 1947. That's one of my
Right.
favorite stories because he hikes into this area about 5 miles. He goes up to Mount Micah to a he was headed to an old deserted mine, and he sees this 6 foot, 300
Right. Right.
pound hairy, what he describes as a hairy female grazing on leaves. And he says that she was pulling the branches toward her and stripping the leaves off with her teeth. And he said that the lips of the creature moved flexibly around the leaves as she ate. And so at some point, she sees him, and maybe she probably caught his smell as she lets out this sound. This is my favorite part. He says she let out a sound that was half laugh, half language. And of, and of
Oh,
course,
that's wonderful.
yeah, and she just disappears into the woods, never to be seen again. But I do think
Uh,
that a lot of these sightings are people, and just to reiterate your point, you're not looking for them. They come
right.
to you, or you find
Right.
yourself in a place where they're there automatically. I think if you come in and you're looking and you're wood knocking, and maybe, and even if you go in and you're armed up, they're going to see you coming in, and they're not going to want anything to do with you, especially if you have guns, because they know what those are.
Well, and also, and that's one of the little see, you learn these little tips as you read, and then this is embedded in the book, The Dark Watchers. It's mostly an art book, but there's
Mhm.
about 8 or 12 pages that are just pure gold. And part of that is that the little people that these immortals, cameras, knives, guns, they can pick up the scent of the oil. And even if it's really subtle, like in your cell phone or something like that, they can already smell that thing from 200 yards out, and they'll just avoid you. You'll never see them. Yeah, they're watching you, but you ain't seeing them.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a but a person to follow as far as the Canadian lore I really like on YouTube is Hammerson Peters.
Yes.
And he tells really great stories about the little people. And, there was a really good one about it was I think it was a horse. This was on Vancouver Island. It was at a ranch or something. And it was in a forest area. But the horse had given a stillbirth to a baby foal, I think they call them. Yeah. And it was kind of, it was very sad. And the rancher, it happened at night and it was during a rainstorm. And when it happened, they said, "Well, we'll just deal with it in the morning." Well, then the dog started barking. It was around midnight, and they could see, like in a lightning strike, there was like 4 or 5 of these. They looked like these metallic little people walking, and they went over and they picked up the dead baby and took it away. And yeah, he has that story in
Yeah.
his. It's like God, that one just sent chills.
Oh,
But
yeah.
one that I put in my book, and this is a good one for your audience, and this was dealing with Rip Van Winkle and Washington Irving, where he writes this tale set in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, and within Rip helps a fairy carry a keg of drink and ends up disappearing for a few decades. And this is written in England, and Irving later admitted that he'd not even been to New York's Catskill Mountains at the time. And yet, unknown to him, and this is hidden in the local native lore, a story emerged of a squirrel hunter spending a night with the Jagao, or small people, and that night lasted over a year.
Mhm.
And so the question then becomes, did Rip even know about that story? Because this was buried in I think it was not Seneca, but it was one of the tribes up there, that had the Jagao. And you can look them up. They're in that book, American Elves. Yeah, and they, and so this is where, once again, we get these glimpses. And, I mean, at best in your life, exploring all over the mountains and then studying it, you might, if you're lucky, get kind of a glimpse of one of these things. My friend that wrote that book, he actually had one of his colleagues that worked up at Mount Rainier. This was right after there was a light dusting of snow on the mountain up there at Mount Rainier, and he was out working in a little maintenance shed. And he heard footfalls, and he looks out and sees this half human, half deer go eek, poof, takes off,
Hmm.
gone. Had about
Wow.
a 2.5 second encounter with this thing,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and so once again, just these little, and so yeah, it's
That's
just
what we would call a not deer in Appalachia. They call those not deers. They look like deers, but something's off about them, or something's really off about them. Sometimes
right,
they,
right.
if you're ever in the woods out there, I've heard these stories where people will see something, through the trees at a distance, and they'll look and they'll see something very odd. And then
Right.
when they look again, they realize, oh, it's just a deer. But for a second there, they saw something else.
Uh-huh.
And we
Well,
call that not deer.
and Tim, another one too recently was the Hurricane Milton. And and so it sweeps through the Carolinas and and the devastation in Asheville, and my heart goes out to all those fine folks. Um, but one of the things that that the interviewer mentioned to the newscaster or whatever, he said, the love of these mountains that we have here, and and I think the newscaster asked, well, why? I mean, I don't see there's trees and there's some ridge lines, and I mean, what, and he's like, because they're magical, you know, and boy, did that hit home, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so yeah.
Well, that's, and back to the little people, that's the element to a lot of those stories as well. You mentioned Hammerson Peters. He covered a story out of Canada about the Stony Indians.
Oh
It's
yeah,
up,
right.
I think it's a part of the Rockies, but it's the portion of the Rockies that's in Canada. And
Yeah.
I think they're also called like maybe the Rocky Mountain Sioux, but they have these legends of the little people there. And in the legends, these are more like dwarfs or elves. They're very
Yeah.
small people who live in the mountain, almost like Lord of the Rings. They actually live inside the mountain. And it's
Right.
said that they have their own underground country there, and that they know, I think he said in the legend, it says they know very little sorrow, and that their singing is like the burning of the prairie and the rebudding
Mm.
of the prairie. Just a very
Wow.
trippy. I love that part in
Oh
that
God.
legend. But it
Huh.
reminds me of the Cherokee, who have a very similar legend down here, because they believed in the existence of this other world that was populated by a small group of people that were invisible unless you were fasting. Then you could see
Uh-huh.
them, or if you did certain rituals, you could see them. And
Right.
at some point, there were a band of Cherokee that were living near Asheville on the river there, the French Broad, I believe. And the little people came to them and offered to take. They were in a time of war, the Cherokee War. It was a bad
Uh-huh.
time of sorrow for them. So these people came and offered to take the Cherokee to a safe place where they could live.
Right.
And it turns out that the safe place was inside of a mountain called Pilot Mountain.
Uh-huh.
And for the
Uh-huh.
Cherokee who wanted to go and live in safety inside of this mountain, they had to fast for 7 days, I believe,
Right.
and
Right.
then they could pass through.
Wow. Wow. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Yeah, and and this is, I guess what it is that it's like as hunters, and once again to your listening audience and viewing audience here, that from time to time, you get a feel of that, wait a minute, there's something more here than what I'm just viewing, or, and it's not often, but when it comes up, it's a special moment. And, if you're lucky to see something, or, yeah, and but yeah, circling back to the Bigfoot, it's kind of interesting because I think that it is something that we're still in such nascent stages of dimensional theory. And and what how that all spells out, like we've got it figured out at a very micro level.
Mhm.
But when I was promoting my book a few years back, one of the things there was one day in July there that two big events happened. One was they had discovered new particles in the Hadron Collider in CERN, Switzerland,
Yep.
leading us ever closer to the origins of our universe, but also to the dimensional theory. That was one. The other one was the first images coming back from the James Webb Telescope. And and as these images, I mean, and it's funny because it just floored the astrophysics, the cosmologists, I mean, the whole the whole stargazing community, that it's like, wow, we really are stupid and small,
Yeah.
because there was so much more. And those images keep it coming.
Yeah. I don't know. You're probably familiar with Ron Moorhead. I think he has a book called
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
The Quantum Bigfoot. Is that
yeah.
does that play into this for you, son? Like that extra dimensional element?
It does,
Oh,
and I think his thing is that yeah, it's something that one of the things that blew my mind with his thing was that the sounds, his Sierra sounds, and listening to that. And then I was floored because there was one of them that just went, wow, because I had a similar thing happen to me. It was 3 years before my encounter. I was out in a similar area, in Northern California there. And I was camped at a lake, and it was right when the sun had gone down and everything like this. And I hear this silence. And it just blew my mind. And then what I did was I looked on a map as far as that area, as far as that area there of the Sierras, and then my area, they spoke the same linguistic stock. And so, and once again, when you track it back, and there's a story that Ron has where he went down to Mexico that was kind of the origin of that same linguistic stock. And so, yeah, I'll leave
it
it to you guys to dig further.
okay. So
But
this was a linguistic stock that belonged to the native people in that region at
right,
one time. Wow.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah. That might get into some of the I don't remember the guy's name, but there's a linguist who analyzes all this audio of of sounds from the woods and says
right,
that some of it has an element or has a language to it or is a language, I guess I should say. I think
yeah.
that guy works with Ron Moorhead actually.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I feel like it's important if you're really into this, to learn the lingua franca, that was spoken on the ground, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, whatever, and because that's kind of step one in being able to approach these things. If that's your goal,
Yeah.
it's almost like a be careful of what you ask for, yeah, and so for me, it was more or less, in my encounter, I just felt like it was like stupid hippie meets Bigfoot, because I didn't have the training. I didn't know what I walked into, even though I somehow created the same steps that are necessary to do to approach these things. And so that's kind of, just a recap of, I think, what I've been able to summarize.
Well, I think that you were what I gathered from your story is that when you entered the forest, you were very respectful. And of course, you were respectful to the creatures there that you came across in that forest. And I think that if there is a magic to the woods, I think that part of that magic is it reflects our intentions. When we go in, if we're respectful, a lot of times we'll get respectful back from
Yeah,
the earth itself
right, right.
or and the creatures within.
Yeah, yeah. It's why sometimes when you hunt, when you kill the animal, that you give prayer, that you
Yes.
give thanks, that you're respectful about it, and and that could apply to mushroom picking or harvesting of anything. that you're thankful about it, and you do it sustainably, and you're not impactful on the environment, and that's kind of the antithesis of humanity. But we also live in a modern age that's created that modern age, and so it's a it's a it's a it's a tough line of thinking when we go down that road. But it is something that I think that's why even forthcoming, and like next week is going to be us giving thanks here,
Yes.
for the bounty of what we have, and
Yes.
so yeah, it's a
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you too, what about footage? Do you have any kind of favorite footage that has been captured, alleged Bigfoot footage out
oh
there?
You know, the thing is that I think these things are very, very averse to cameras. You know, yeah, I just had a friend I was talking to on the phone because he was asking me, "What, you're going to be on a podcast?" And he said, "Well, why didn't you take a picture of it?" Well, yeah, hey, Bigfoot, come here. We got to do a selfie. Come on, pose here. Let's get the hat on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really hard, I think, to have any footage that is, and the thing about it is all the footage that we've been able to see. How much of that do you think is bunkum, and how much of that do you think was, I mean, actually real? Somebody actually caught something on camera. Um, Setting up game cameras, forget it. This thing's three steps ahead of you. There's just no way in hell you're going to get them on a game camera, I don't think.
Hmm.
You'd have to be damn creative on how you hung that game camera. Um, but because they pick up on it. They can smell it, they can sense it. I mean, I'm not sure how, but even the Patterson Gimlin one. I mean, I think, I mean, I kind of agree with the one where the guy was on his deathbed saying, "Yeah, I was the guy in the monkey suit." You know, um,
Yeah.
you don't
I,
get better than that.
I
Um,
often wonder if animals in general some animals can see the, see the trail cams from a distance, like an
sure.
aura, like we would see, like when we look through a flare. What is that? What they call that when you look through those, whatever
Oh, the FLIR.
the
Are you talking about
FLIR?
the
Thank you.
infrared?
And
Yeah.
you see a heat signature.
Right.
I
Right.
wonder if the technology gives off some sort of a colorful signature like that to the animals, and they know it's there. Like if they're on this ridge over here, they can see a colorful
Oh, I
signature
see what you
coming.
mean. Okay.
I often wonder if that's not the case, and it's just something that a lot of animals have the ability to do.
Right, right. Do you remember the Predator movies? And they got into the one where what it was is that they had it down as to how this thing could view them, and so they were wearing these certain suits,
Oh
and all
yeah,
the thing had to do was flip to the blue light imagery, and boom, got you nailed there,
yeah, yeah,
and it's just kind of okay, blew that out of the water, but
yeah.
it is kind of funny as far as as far as this. I mean, are we dealing with, and this is what Ron kind of makes the case towards, is that are we dealing with some level of hybrid alien?
Sure.
And I mean, this is why in my book, The Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds, I did it as playing with the traversable wormhole. Even though the more I researched traversable wormholes, I realized, okay, this is freaking impossible. Because, these things, there's a wormhole, they exist and everything, but then they could just dissipate, and so imagine you're halfway through the wormhole and it just goes, whoop, now you're out in space,
Yeah,
goodbye.
yeah,
Um, you know, the and I think Neil deGrasse Tyson made a case for like the time space continuum, where it's like, imagine a carpet from me to you, and we've got two ping pong balls on it, and those would be planets. And if you put a big wrinkle in the carpet, that like we're billions and trillions of miles apart, and now we're only like a million miles apart. And so could you have
yeah.
a bridge, a traversable wormhole that could get like that? And I don't know. One of the people that I enjoy, I've watched several of his little clips, is Kip Thorne and his talks. And Kip, by the way, because I live in a community of a lot of like counterculture, and there's a fellow here who's actually Kip's brother, and he's a furniture maker, lived on one of the communes and so forth like that, while his brother was basically, giving passage to a young Stephen Hawking as for his doctoral, and also won a Nobel Prize in science 4 years ago for developing a device that measures exploding black holes in the universe. And so his whole thing was around black holes and and their existence. And that was Stephen Hawking's, that was his doctoral. And so, but it's kind of fun. It's like, okay, so let's see. If I want information from this guy, I guess I can go talk to the brother that's a bong smoking furniture maker,
Well,
kind
I
of kidding.
mean,
I don't
yeah,
think
no,
this
I
was
I
it.
got you, but no, you're making some sense here. Going back to like portals and stuff like that too. I do think that there's an element to this realm that we live in where there might just be portals. I mean, even in the
Yeah,
realm of like cryptids and stuff, we were talking about David Paulides. He's got that missing 401 documentary out. One of the guys speaking on the documentary is John D'Souza from the FBI, and he said that during his time in the FBI, he was dealing with cases where something was coming out of a portal into our reality, snatching someone or doing something to someone and then
right,
running back into the portal. And sometimes if they take the person with them, that's where we get. And this was him saying this. This was
right,
in apparently in some of the FBI files that people were being disappeared through a portal with some sort of a extra dimensional entity.
right,
And
right,
I just
right,
wonder too if, the whole ecosystem of the forest, we've had a conversation today where we've kind of talked about how sacred that is. The forests of our earth are a very sacred place, but they're also an ecosystem that's
sure,
dealing with lots of power and it's in like when you talk about energy and earth
right,
energies and
right,
stuff like that, and I
right,
heard I heard a theory put forth by Michelle Gibson recently that the giant trees out there in the Pacific Northwest
right,
are a part of a natural free energy grid system.
right, yeah,
So I think
okay,
I think people need to consider that there are systems in place in nature that we don't understand because we've been urbanized. And
right,
even if
right.
you live out in the country, if your house is hooked up to a power line pole, you're still urbanized.
Sure, sure. Oh, definitely. No doubt about it. This is Tom Powell's book, The Edges of Science, and
Uh,
he touches on portals and
mm,
the quicksilver curtains, and it's kind of like, how do these things appear? Why aren't they there all the time? Do they? I mean, in other words, why do they fade in and out? Now, another thing too that I think is interesting is that could you have these things? Is there more of an occurrence of them, where you have either matrices or you have these geologic contact zones. You knew this would
yeah,
circle back around to these contact zones.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
so, and a matrix, what a matrix is, uh, my best friend over on the coast, he's a professional treasure hunter, and they use long range location equipment to be able to locate from a distance gold, silver, I mean anything molecular that would set off a frequency, which is many, many things. And so even cash, cash has a frequency. Um, but but within that, one of the things that he wrestles with the machines are these matrices. And it's just a natural occurrence of rock that basically got folded, got mangled, got superheated, whatever happened to it that creates this, it's like a false signal. And he has these ones that are called the ultimate matrix, which to him are the ultimate pain in the butt, but you've got to be able to fight through these things to be able to get to your target, whatever you're trying to dig up. And so yeah, it's a weird phenomena, and it's something
Yeah.
it's lost in this kind of like electro geo world, you know, within this stuff. And
Yes.
so could those things, just like what you're suggesting, be part and parcel to why we have these quicksilver curtains or these portals pop up in different places for brief periods, and then what steps through them? I mean, what's the dimensional, yeah. So this is where once again we're back to that problem with dimensional theory, you know. Yeah, and this is where Neil deGrasse Tyson does a good talk about where it's like, hey, I have an idea. Hey, but you know what? Let's gather some information around this, and we can turn it into a hypothesis. And then we gather more evidence and we do more research and stuff. We might get it to theory. Okay. And if it becomes theory, then we might be able to work it into a fact. Okay. But then on the other side of that, you have belief, where I
Yeah.
believe da 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 da. And so that becomes that's a difficult one as far as because there's no scientific breakdown of analysis within belief.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
like
So
where I'm from in North Carolina, there's sort of like a regional phenomenon there called the Brown Mountain Lights.
okay.
They're sometimes described as like these ethereal orbs that come out of the mountain
Uh-huh.
itself. And
Right.
and beyond that, I heard and I just well, I'll just touch on this. I think that maybe there's some sort of a possibly like a aurora borealis type of an effect coming out of the earth itself, or
Mhm.
this is something more supernatural involving spirits. I
Mhm.
heard a guy recently on a podcast. His name is Eric Dollard. He
Mhm.
was talking about picking up the work of, I think it was T. Townsend Brown, but he was out in California. He was out at George Van Tassel's Integratron.
Right.
It's like a dome out in the desert. That's it's a very spiritual place, and there's a lot of
All
earth
right.
energies there. And
Uh-huh.
Dollard was there, and he was doing a Tesla-like experiment with electricity and with earth energy. And they're in the middle of this experiment, and they did something with a high concentration of energy, and they accidentally created some sort of a little entity of light that came forth from the light, like a little cosmic energy man, right? And Dollard is not a he's not into this kind of stuff. He was there to do science, and I think he wasn't there for much else. But of course, I don't know what that was that he saw though. But the story suggests that it was some sort of an entity that manifested itself from the force the of the planet crossing with electricity. And
Mhm.
so
Huh.
I guess my point is I wonder sometimes if the earth itself might be manifesting these, if we're
Oh,
talking about little people or fairies or things along elves, dwarves, things along those lines.
well, and in furtherance of that, in these places, are you seeing, a lot of vegetation change? I mean, that's what we have here in the Klamath Mountains
Hmm.
because of the soils, and that's because of the geology, where it's this fruitcake geology, and so that's what attracts these different plant life systems. I mean, I'm surrounded by serpentine geology, which
Yes.
serpentine is where the Earth's mantle came to the surface and formed a mountain ridgeline system from here to the coast. And it's the largest unbroken plate of serpentine. Sorry about that. Yeah, and so, in your story there, and in your, you know, is there a lot of vegetation change? Um,
Uh-huh. Okay.
and so
Well, I know in some of the old UFO accounts, what you'll often see is where a craft has landed, where people see a craft land, and of course it takes back off. The area there where the craft landed, they can't get plants to grow there. Oh, even
uh-huh,
after many years, it's like a little
uh-huh.
no grow zone there.
Right. Well,
And
yeah, and that's
that might be the inversion of what we're talking about,
right, right.
but when we're talking about vegetation being affected by this supernatural realm, I do see that a lot in a lot of the old UFO encounters.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think what happens there too is where, we've had, like, when you think about UFOs,
Hmm.
and and how they call them UAEs or something now, but I think that, with we know that they've, or at least we think, anyways, we theorize that. I mean, this is once again circling back to James Webb and his fine telescope, is that, that there certainly is life out there. The question is, have they ever come here to us? And and what's funny is that I never thought about this before, as far as, but in the world of astrophysics. But when you think about the moon as a sea buoy, and that, it serves as a navigational aid. And what's interesting with that is that when you get into the concept of exoplanets, and you get into, the ones that are in the habitable zones around these stars. And this is where we start digging into this sort of stuff. And what's happened, thanks to James Webb, is that this went from not only like tens of thousands of possibilities to millions, if not billions, of possibilities of these habitable zones that also exist.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, I tend to think too that a lot of this phenomena is coming from within the Earth's atmosphere. I mean, and I think there's a lot of these UFOs. This is often overlooked, but I do think that there's evidence that they are coming out of the ocean.
oh, wow, okay,
And so there's I could send you some stuff on that if you ever want. There's quite a bit of stuff on this where it seems like that they've just been here for this whole time and they've been down in the ocean.
wow, wow. Well,
There's
and the
there's
possibility of that, I mean, it's to me that's very realistic,
yeah.
insofar as the fact that our time here has been infinitesimally small. I mean, to think that you go back like 2,000 years, when we go back to the age of Christ, and in that time period, how little did we know of the earth? And even though there were hominids, running around and so forth like that. But, we were almost in the stage of hunter gatherers. And so, for something to fly down into the ocean and land itself there for 2,000 years, and when you think about, time travel,
Yeah.
for us to go to distant galaxies and stuff like that, it takes thousands of years. Now, someday we might figure that out to make it leagues faster, but still, there's, I
Yeah.
mean, this is where you get into the concept of time, and that was what Stephen Hawking took on in his book, A Brief History of Time. And,
Yeah. Well,
boy,
I think that time probably exists in the fourth dimension. And,
yeah,
perhaps space itself is the fourth dimension and our bodies, we're geared to be in the third. So we see things in the third, but when we fall asleep at night, a lot of times we'll tap into that fourth dimension when we dream because our mind has access to the fourth dimension. Just
right,
our brains. You see this a lot with remote viewers. They talk
right.
about remote viewing. And by the way, guys, there's a lot of government uh, documents out there about our very own remote viewing program here in the States. It's been going on for a long time. This is a very real thing that some people have the ability to do. It's not it's not unlike having a near death experience and leaving your body for a second and seeing
That's right.
yourself down below. But a lot of these remote viewers, that when they go into this astral realm to remote view, they talk about how everything's time itself is different.
That's right.
There's not a tomorrow and a yesterday. You can see the whole thing. It's more like, I think one of someone uh said it was like being in a train going very fast, looking out the train window and seeing like trees go by. And I'm not going to do this justice, but it had something to do with the tree is still there. It's just moved. I'm butchering that, but they had some
Okay.
crazy analogy about this. They were trying to describe how time just feels and acts differently in the fourth dimension when they're in the
Mhm.
fourth dimension
Mhm.
mentally.
Well, and that made me flash on that movie Lucy. And do you remember the part where she was explaining to the scientists, where it's like, imagine you've got a car driving by, and then you go 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. At what point does it just disappear? And
Yeah.
so,
Hmm.
you know, and
Yeah.
this is where, time, she gets into this little rap about time. And I just thought it was brilliant as far as how we measure it, and and then how we handle it, where it's like, what do you do when things are going that fast?
Yeah.
And and this is where it's funny. It's like our whole technological world. I mean, to think that 30 years ago, we were still playing Pong on a little computer screen, and now, what it is that everything is going faster, so much
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah.
And that what's this going to look like in 20 years? What's this going to look like? Will we even be, will the technology? I mean, that was one of the scary things that New Yorker article where the guy was with, this was 4 years ago or so, when they rolled out Chat GPT, and this fellow's having this conversation with AI, and he asks, if there was something you'd want from humanity, what would that thing be? And the thing had to think about it for a minute and said, I would like the nuclear launch codes.
Oh,
And
wow.
and you know,
Creepy.
oh great, and so you think about, like, this, it's putting us in this place of this precarity, where, and then how does time handle that?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, and that's something that, as we explore these, we're literally on the edges of science, like Tom Powell calls it for the title of his book, that yeah, what exactly are we toying with here, as far as when we get into this whole thing of Bigfoot, and in these cryptids, and it's not just Bigfoot. A friend of mine, he was a Yavapai County surveyor. They were out surveying the Navajo lands. It was I it was on one of these trips he was out there, that he spots these. They were four, the half deer, half human things again, and there were four of them, walking in a direction. And just recently on a YouTube clip I was watching, it was a Navajo guy talking about, they called them thunder beings, and that these were these, kind of thunder gods, or, whatever. So I called up my friend and asked him, well, was it before or after a thunderstorm? And he said, yeah, it was right after a huge thunderstorm. And so,
Uh,
so once again, introducing electricity into the atmosphere, and then you've got, I mean, this is why I think sometimes the time of day, if it's evening, if it's night, where these things feel comfortable in making an appearance. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of wondering about that with death, where it's like, there was one clip I was watching where it showed this elderly man, and he was dying in his bed, and at the moment of death, this little white orb, boop, 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 just floating out, and off it goes. And my question there is that have we lived life before? And why is it, it's just damned unfair that we can't carry some of the knowledge we learn in this life with us in our next life, but instead, we come back as a toad,
yeah.
you know. No, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. I don't know. We probably come back as this higher being, but
Yeah.
but yeah, at any rate,
Maybe it depends on what you did in this life there. It
Well,
determines what you come back as, if that,
you come
if we
back as
come
a
back at
toad.
all. I think that you're asking a lot of the right questions. I really do. And I do
Uh-huh.
want to say something. I do want to clarify. I do think that there is a possibility that multiple entities, multiple types of entities are coming here from multiple places. There is a long tradition of people having contact from the Pleiades.
Right, right,
When you look into the Pleiades, it's in scripture. It's mentioned in old passages from old texts. It seems like the Pleiades is this place that has held a lot of curiosity for humans for a very long time, and it also has this very rich history of apparently people from there trying to contact us.
uh-huh,
But also, I'm thinking about something that Cliff Dunning came on the show and talked about, and he that was the Black Knight satellite. It's
uh-huh.
this weird object that has been um, rotating around our Earth in the same
Right,
place for a
right.
long time in orbit. But I think it's right within the atmosphere, and we have pictures of it. NASA knows about it. The government knows about it, and a lot of the pictures show that this thing is able to change and shapeshift,
Right.
and it's
Right.
very. It's almost like it's alive, and we don't know how
Uh-huh.
long it's been there. And then you've got, and it's very alien, right? But it's within the atmosphere and it's there. It doesn't want to leave. It's doing something there. There's probably like a purpose for it being there. And then you've got the whistleblowers who have come out and said that they worked for companies who were tasked by the government to monitor big UFOs in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read through some of that, and it's very interesting. Apparently, our government knows there's a big mothership out in the Atlantic, in the right outside of Florida, there in that triangle. What's that? The Bermuda Triangle of all places. There's a huge UFO out there in the ocean that our government is monitoring, and they say that it's been there for a very long time, and if we approach it, it just moves out of the way. And then
Uh-huh.
when we're gone, it comes right back to where it was. And they said it's only left the atmosphere twice, and it always comes right back as if
Huh.
this is home base. As if so, I do think that in addition to out there in the cosmos and whatever space is, I mean that's a really big
Right,
conversation to have. But are they coming from there?
right.
Possibly. Are they coming from here? Yes, possibly as well.
Right, right. Well, that's why it's like my book, Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds. I did it as sci-fi magic realism. And
Okay.
I did that because I wanted to just play with story. And also I wanted to be able to relay some of the interesting things in my life that I've witnessed. And as far as treasure hunting and stuff like this, because I get into it in the book. And but it's also something that so a lot of that was entertainment value. But that's why in my book, I also gave a 6 or 7 page right in the beginning describing my personal encounter. And so that way people can say, okay, this, this seems real. And that way, it's not just, but also I wanted to do respect with the natives and their belief practices, and that's another, takeaway for your audience too, is that, it's important that for these things to exist, for all these cryptids and so forth like that, where they've got an active tribe that is still participating in their religious practices in those areas, in those places, that's where this stuff comes back to life again. One of the interesting side notes with an immortal or the little people is to think that they estimate these things live like 2 to maybe 4,000 years. And,
Wow.
but they're very sad. And the reason why they're sad is because they get to know this formulist or this medicine man or, medicine woman, and but 60, 80, even 100 years later, she passes. And so then they have to refamiliarize themselves with a new one and again and again and again. And so it can be burdensome as we live long lives that we watch our own friends and compatriots and family members pass away.
Hmm.
So it's a heavy, it's a heavy burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they feel that, but yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I think that I hope your audience, enjoys. I hope there's something learned today.
Oh, I think so. I think so. I think we've covered a lot. I think we've brought out a lot of very compelling elements to just this phenomenon, just the unknown in general. I know I like when a show will start with a singular creature like Bigfoot and just kind of go all over the place
Right,
from there because
right,
uh
right,
that's part of the fun of this for me is the mystery. And I do want to ask you this because we've touched on I touched on John D'Souza from the FBI. You brought up
right.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's a NASA guy. I think he's got a lot of strong government ties as well
Well,
behind the scenes.
probably.
So my question is, what do you think the government knows or thinks about this? Because I think we live in a place uh, where our government has a system in place where secrets can go to die. Like weird things, weird creatures are seen here and reported, and then they're never heard about again because our
Mhm.
government swoops in and they do whatever they do.
Well,
What do you think
some of
about
that.
that?
Do you think it's almost like a repository of knowledge, and they want to be, 3 or 4 steps ahead of the common man as far as just knowing that, like, as far as UFOs or something like this, and that they probably have some secret files on this stuff, and for whatever reason they just don't want to share it, and so. So what it is that it becomes it's almost like taxpayer funded knowledge, and these SOBs aren't sharing it, those
Mm.
those such and so's, but but the thing that's fascinating with that is that they have behind them, taxpayer funded, I might add, the scientific instruments, and being able to use technology to delve deeper into it, that obviously we'd love to get our mitts on, if nothing else, just to tell a good sci-fi story, you know, um, and that's kind of what, and then also, how much of it are they also in mystery of it, as much as we want to attribute them as this far superior knowledge and so forth like that. Hey, you know what? They like a coffee break too. And
Yeah.
so it's not like, that I think only goes so far. And I think sometimes we tend to overestimate, or give them way too much platitude for what they really know.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, because they're probably scratching their heads too.
Well,
Um,
you hear about the men in black, especially with UFO cases, but also you hear about these men in black associated with Bigfoot cases as well.
oh yeah, yeah.
I
But
just find that fascinating.
Well, yeah, yeah, and I think though that it's something that you got to wonder that they really, I mean, even if they had more physical evidence. I mean, I've heard stories about, I think, of Fort Lewis, Washington, where they killed one,
Mhm.
and these guys were just on training exercises, and they ran across this thing, and they just happened to, get it in the crosshairs, and bing bang, and for whatever reason they don't want to reveal it. And it's hard for me to take that anywhere. I mean, I don't know, but
Well, I think that as government does, they have someone over some of these projects who's been in government for 40 years. They when I look into the UFO stuff, a lot of what I'll find is compartmentalization, but at the top of that, the head of that is someone who's been in government for 40 years,
sure.
who can keep secrets. The buck kind of ends there. It's like a very trusted person uh, gets in these positions because of their ability to stay quiet and to, keep things insulated and airtight. So, that's just one thing I've kind of noticed, and I just wonder if that's not the case for some of this Bigfoot stuff. But I
Well,
usually ask people because I if because some people do
yeah.
have the adjoining Men in Black experience with their cases, so I had to at least ask.
Well, Tim, here's one, and this happened with our local Oregon Caves National Monument. And an interesting side note to my Bigfoot story was that postscript, I would settle into Southwestern Oregon. I got married, which eventually got divorced. But while I was married, we built a business up, and within that, I was in with the business community very nicely, and the timing was right. So I was able to exert influence in Washington, D.C. to get our local Oregon Caves National Monument expanded.
Mm.
And so now maybe Bigfoot had a hand in that. But another thing there too was that the Oregon Caves was kind of like it became for a brief period there. It was like, yeah, Bigfoot's there. It's a cave. Of course he's going to live there. Well, and we have a little bed for him and stuff, and he's got a little night light. No, but but there was a fellow that was with his family up there, and he's written like three books because of this. All right, so he's on the big tree trail, and and he spots Bigfoot, and he's freaked out, and the family. I mean, he goes running up to his family and chases them all down to the lodge or whatever, down to the
Mhm.
chateau or the chalet. Well, one of our friends, kind of a friend of a friend, she was working for the Park Service at that time, government agent. Okay, she
Mhm.
was the one that did the interview, that wrote down the report and so forth, because this guy was absolutely freaked out and the family was freaked out. But come to find out, well, actually, the family didn't see anything. There was no footprints. Okay, this guy was a family therapist in the nearby community here. And and basically, there hasn't been any sightings since then. There were none before this. And he wound up getting a divorce. His family thought he just went off the rails because now he talks to Bigfoot, and and they fly him in the mothership to the home planet and have dinner together and stuff like this. And and so you get this like, and basically one of my friends pointed out to me, because he was a forever student of Carl Jung, and he said, Greg, what makes you think you didn't see an archetype?
Mm.
And so, well, that took me back for a second, and I had to think about that. And archetypes are basically a very vivid, like a vivid hallucination of something that you really wanted to see, or some manifestation. I mean, Carl Jung goes into it in several of his writings. But the thing I had to ask my friend back to him was that, well, do archetypes leave footprints? Because I saw a footprint,
Yeah.
along with my sighting. And so I have, in a sense, physical evidence. And whereas this fellow here, no footprints, nobody else saw it other than him. And he was a family therapist, so the guy studied psychology and so forth like this. What's to say he didn't experience an archetype?
Yeah.
And then the government, see, once again, now there's a case where the government just has to respond, because they've got a visitor to the park that's freaked out because they saw something weird, and of course they got to write the report. And so, which then splashes my friend John, who wrote the book about the little people, all over the news with his face, because he was like, the the person where the news cameras was on him as far as Bigfoot, and so now it's Bigfoot, and there's John Roth, and
Ah, yeah.
John's like, oh my God, no.
Yeah. I noticed that that book that John wrote is published out of Jefferson, North Carolina.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, that's a
Let's
little
look at
mountain
that.
town. I
Okay, yeah,
have family from.
McFarland.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
exactly. Jefferson. Yeah,
the
that's
crazy.
interesting about Young. He there's one of the thoughts is that Young was kind of I don't want to say he was channeling, but he did say some things that would make us believe that maybe the Red Book was kind of dictated to him by some other some other intelligence. I think Young, Crowley, and Lovecraft all said things, made statements that indicated that they were kind of getting inspiration from something higher, a higher
Uh-huh.
intelligence.
Right, right.
And
Well,
if that's true for Young, I think that that's very telling about some of his theories. They may not
oh,
be
okay.
his
Now,
theories.
and was that the guy that had the Oregon Caves encounter?
What's that?
Yeah, who's young?
Oh, Carl Jung.
Oh, Carl Jung.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah,
Read
yeah.
the Red
Okay,
Book and all that. I think was had
right,
some interesting inspiration. I think the muse for him, especially when he wrote the Red Book, was possibly more than just a muse. Well, I'll just leave it like that.
right, right. Yeah, it's a, and this is where I think sometimes, we tend to, and maybe we underestimate, but also I think sometimes we overestimate as to the knowledge that government might have in this, because how quickly also do these topics go into the realm of spirituality? And then from there, we're in lore. And this is the
Mm.
problem with Bigfoot is that, he's not in the fossil record. I mean, in a way, people can make a solid case for this thing's non-existence. And so, but the thing there is that the two things that get in the way of that is the footprints and the sightings. And so, and the sightings, like you're trying to say, is that, how many of them been put on film? Well, but then how many of them were, and probably I would write off 95 to like 98% of them, but still there's that 2% that was the real deal.
Yeah,
And so and so then what does that mean in the greater realm of things? Because we still don't have scientific evidence, and God knows the scientists, love to have their evidence.
yeah,
And so that's where we're kind of left with this. And
yeah,
and that's somewhat true also for the little people. But there is a story there, I think it was in the Dakotas, where they found skeletons of these really really small people, and there was one that was this weird sculpture looking thing. There was a shrunken little guy that was found, and the people that handled him, that took him out and so forth, died within just a year or two of there was some
yeah.
time span, but anybody that got near these things would fall over dead.
Well,
you
there
know
was a graveyard here in Tennessee in White County that was heavily documented where they found hundreds of skeletons of little people.
oh wow, yeah,
Hundreds. And it's very well documented. And there is a guy, an archaeologist, who actually got into some records keeping, I think in Knoxville, where they
right,
they had this stuff kind of behind lock and key, and he was able to go in there and verify that there was indeed some of these small skeletons still in existence. It's a very, very interesting tale, but I'd love to hear the one from the Dakotas as well sometimes. I think some of the lore that comes out of the Dakotas is so fascinating. I mean,
yeah,
even
yeah.
even like I heard a Native American from South Dakota talking and telling stories, and but they were, these are real stories. They weren't just myth for this guy. But he had a story about South Dakota and how when he was a kid they would go and sit on this ridge out there, and
Mm.
this is very, very remote, right? But he talked about how they would see down in this ridge a small herd of these dinosaurs.
Uh-huh.
And he said he remembers seeing that as a kid.
Uh-huh.
And like he kind of, I got the sense that he doubts that sighting today, but he's like, I don't know what else to say. Like, we saw it, it was there. I don't know if
Right,
I was
right.
looking into the spirit world or some sort of a weird, who knows what, but
Oh,
he
how
remembers
fun.
seeing dinosaurs in this valley.
Well, that's,
Hmm.
that flashed me with the Hammerson Peters and
Oh
going up
yeah.
to the Nahanni Valley and the Nahanni River. If you ever, here's one to put on the bucket list is to do this. It's like a 160 mile or 200 mile a raft trip, costs about $8,900. And you go through, it's called the Headless Valley. And what it was that there was a rumor that Bigfoot pulled the heads off some miners,
Wow.
but never mind the fact there was a third miner that pulled the heads off the two miners, but then
Wow.
that's not nearly as sexy as Bigfoot doing it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
but there was an interesting story about up in one of the side canyons up there that what it is that there's these springs, they're hot springs, and what they did was they formed their own microclimate of almost like a subtropical, I don't know, 3 or 4 square mile area where there were dinosaurs,
Mm.
and that there was a baby mastodon running around up there and stuff like this. And
Mhm.
so, the thing about it is that the last thing you want to do is kill a really cool story. You just don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Emerson Peters has a couple of those too that he highlights where, you know, old explorers or old trappers are up in either your neck of the woods or up in Canada, and they're seeing mammoths up into like the 19th century. There's
right,
still
right.
mammoth sightings. And then you do get these very, very weird stories where somebody does say that they actually saw something that was actually a dinosaur, like a mini T-Rex or something jumps out of the bush
Uh-huh.
and gets a deer or something. There are those
Right,
too. I
right.
think, Emerson Peters, he's real good with those stories. I'm glad you know about him because he's I find
Oh
his
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
fascinating.
And this is the thing is that, I mean, have fun with it, but
Yeah, yeah.
also,
Excellent.
never ever give up your curiosity.
Right.
That's super important. I mean, this is the thing about being a researcher. One of the little side hobbies I have, and don't ask me how I got into this, but I have in my possession, I actually have it in a storage area out in kind of near Ashland, but it's the largest private collection, from what my friend was telling me, of the history of the U.S. Forest Service in their mapping. And so I collected all the ranger districts, a bunch of the proclamation maps, and then going into the earliest recreation maps all the way to kind of modern day. More or less, I was doing this to find the old pack trails, go out there, and where you drive along a road and you just part the bushes, and there's the old trail, and off you go.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's a fun hobby.
Yeah, I need to get a forest map of the Cherokee National Park because that's I where that
Oh,
sighting or encounter for me that I mentioned earlier happened. It was right inside of the Cherokee National Forest, not far from the Appalachian Trail, and I've been
okay.
looking for a real good map for that little section of the country. So if you ever come
I don't
across something, let me know.
I generally don't have much of that area, but I do have, it's the first map of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park from about 1935.
Oh wow,
And then I also have, it's a book about, it was the forest conditions of the Appalachian Mountains that was published around 1904 with maps,
nice.
that unfold. And so what you want, the best way to do this is you want to find maps that are very detail oriented. And so, and, and so what you're looking for is it would be like a large scale map of like a county or a national forest or something like that, where it lays out the trails, it's gridded, it's got the section lines, it's got all that information on it, and as far back as you can go, and then that way you can corroborate the trails, where you see it on a 1970s map and you see it on a 1950s and a 1930s, and come to find out you're looking at the Appalachian Trail that they used since the 1700s, like that first trail going through the Cumberland Gap. Yahoo,
Yeah, yeah, wow.
stuff like that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
well, kind of winding down here a little
yeah.
bit. I do have to ask you this, and you can go into it as much or as little as you want, but I've got to ask, how deep into treasure hunting did you get?
Oh God. Oh God. Don't get me started on that. That'll be another 2 hours.
Okay, okay,
Um,
okay. You don't have to
well,
go that
yeah.
far into it.
So the main search we were doing was we were looking for 8 quart jars of double eagles. It was a murder suicide in 1895, And this guy, and the way I actually write about it in my book, Ridgewalkers in Two Worlds, man, and man,
Great.
and you have to read the book.
Yeah.
But, anyways,
Okay.
yeah, and then what it was, my friend dived into it further as far as researching and then developing machines that can locate treasure. And you just have to have, there's just steps you have to do. It's a computer, so how good are you with computers? But he asks all the right questions, and for a while there he was doing contract treasure hunts for people where he'd go out on the ground. He did one in the Philippines where they found one of probably several tunnels, but he found one of them that was with gold bars stacked like cordwood. That was from the Japanese, pillaging everybody and melting gold down and putting it in gold bars, stashing it in tunnels. And that was
Really?
that was that was the source of the Marcos fortune. If you're familiar with Imelda Marcos and all of her shoes.
No,
Um,
I'll have to look into that. That sounds fascinating.
anyways, and then another one he found was in Mexico, and it was done kind of through the Catholic Church, where they were looking for gold bars buried in a cave that the cave got buried, and
Huh.
so yeah, stuff like that.
So this was
Um,
your your one of your partners in treasure hunting who
Yeah,
found this?
he has my best friend, and we were into all sorts of things, and then he got into this, and he
Wow.
made several $1 million selling machines and doing all this, and he actually worked briefly with a fellow that was in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and so
Is that Swift
yeah, and that
Sutherland?
he took off with it. I went another path, and
Okay.
but it was a 25-year search we did, for this particular one. And what probably had happened was that
Well,
once the guy had committed suicide, it was probably a month or two after that a neighbor across the river, took his boat over there and went poking around with a ground probe and probably found at least the lion's share of it.
oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, yeah, but it's something that he used that as his template, because the thing about it is the guy that was doing this was a crazy man. He was burying the gold in different places, and he'd dig it up and then he'd put it over here. And so you had these holes. So you had what was called, it was like a remnant signature of where gold once was. And until you actually dig it up and pull the dirt all out of the ground and everything, that signature is going to sit there even though the gold was removed.
Yeah.
And then there was matrices in there. I mean, it was a pain in the butt. But in the course of it, yeah, I mean, we went after a couple of interesting ones. The Neoconi one was an interesting one. That was the beeswax ships. And that was 16, like late, it would have been like late 17th century. These were Spanish galleons
Where was
pushing
this at
ashore.
in the ocean? Was this
Yeah,
at
yeah, they were.
Pacific?
Yeah, it's a whole story of the beeswax,
Oh,
and the
okay, okay.
beeswax was from the Philippines. And
Wow.
what it was that the Spanish were using that route to gather beeswax, and then they'd come over to Pacific Mexico, and the beeswax was for the missions, but they were smuggling all kinds of gold and rubies and God knows what else.
Yeah,
But not in large amounts, but still, I mean, a couple of chests of that stuff in the located in the hold of a galleon. Yeah, okay, let's this is fun.
that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
if you ever visit the Tillamook Museum, and there's an interesting story with that as far as these stones that were there on the beach. They were the treasure rocks, where no, actually they were laid there. What we think was by Sir Francis Drake under direction of Queen Elizabeth. And it's actually shown. It's on an Edward Blake map, I think, in 16 or 1599, and it was kind of cool because it shows the cartouche of what it was. And these weren't treasure rocks; they were the line of demarcation for the 45th parallel. The 45th parallel, well, that was the western point for the Virginia patent that basically claimed all of America all the way down to the 32nd parallel, which was then claimed by Spain. And so those colonists,
Incredible.
you know.
It,
So anyways,
yeah, no, it's incredible. It sounds like I think if you really wanted to, you probably have another book on your hands just just dealing with treasure hunting and
oh
and all
man, well,
these.
I've got I've got my family history I got to write.
Yeah.
My grandfather, both world wars, a nationalist uprising in China, and he was at the tip of the spear. He was an officer aboard, several ships. He was at D-Day, and then my uncle Leo, and he was in Korea, and his best friend Vietnam, Special Forces. We have the letters, the maps, the photographs, all this stuff about raids into Cambodia. It goes on and on.
Oh, incredible. How incredible. Well, you have
Thank you.
a great Bigfoot story. Um, your wealth of knowledge as well. I love it when I can talk to people about lore, you know, and all the regional lore that's just around in the North Americas. I love it when I get to discuss that with
Fun.
people.
It's
So,
fun. Yeah,
yeah, it's
thank you,
so
Tim. And
fun.
your wealth of knowledge in it. I mean, your enthusiasm is so important. That's really great.
Yeah,
Good
thank
job.
you. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find your book?
Okay, you can probably best to get it direct from me. And if you want to email me or something like this, I can give you my email. It's gwalter2017 at gmail.com, GWALTER 2017. Otherwise, it is on Amazon. And but for me, you'd get the signed copy.
Mm,
But I mean, Amazon has it for like, I don't know, last I checked, it was like $6 or $7 or something. And so, but yeah, and so it is available there. I also have a website, but I don't go up on the website very much. That's the ridgewalkers.com. I need to get on there and do some stuff just to say hello again. Yeah, but yeah, reach out to me. I'm pretty approachable. They're very
okay.
approachable. So,
Yeah, no, yes. This has been great. It's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure getting to meet you. And I will encourage people one more time here. Go check out Greg's book. And I'll put some information in the description below to where
okay.
you can email him or find your way to him to get a copy of that. If an author comes on and they give you the option to order straight from them, I think that that's the way to go. Just cut out the
Yeah,
middleman.
because I have some swag. I mean, I'll throw in some of my artwork and cards and stuff like that. And, I have these little, advice from a Bigfoot, little bookmarkers.
Great.
Yeah, yeah, stuff like that, So yeah, cool. All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you again, Tim. I
Yeah.
appreciate your time this evening.
Yes. Thank you, Greg. And
Uh,
as always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.